Hello, soldiers all around the world. As you have no doubt heard from every talking head out there, we are at a pivotal moment in history. As I saw from the beginning and becomes more and more clear as this war drags on, there's only one group of people that can bring this conflict to some semblance of a peaceful end. As more and more politicians, news anchors, state heads, celebrities realize this and throw their voice and weight behind the mission of trying to reach the Russian people, the cacophony of voices may just grow loud enough to overwhelm the state-run propaganda machine of Putin. This will happen from a variety of angles, the bravest being Russians going on television and spreading the word. The most poignant attempt we've seen so far from Governor Schwarzenegger, and a million more voices across social media, news channels, and government agencies. In adding my tiny voice to that list, I want to do it by analyzing a piece of art. Because after all, life imitates art. If you have never or have not seen it in a long time, I highly encourage you to watch V for Vendetta. An isolated England is run by a brutal fascist government. The protagonist, whose face you never see because he is meant to be the embodiment of an idea, not a person, is attempting to wake the populace up from their stupor in order to resist and overthrow the fascist government.
Good evening, London. Allow me first to apologize for this.
The emergency channel!
I do, like many of you, appreciate the comforts of the everyday routine, the security of the familiar, the tranquility of repetition.
Bloody hell.
I enjoy them as much as any bloke. But in the spirit of commemoration,
Who's that, Mum?
whereby those important events of the past, usually associated with someone's death or the end of some awful bloody struggle, are celebrated with a nice holiday, I thought we could mark this November the 5th, a day that is sadly no longer remembered, by taking some time out of our daily lives to sit down and have a little chat. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak.
Let me think, just let
I
me think.
suspect even now, orders are being shouted into telephones, and men with guns will soon be on their way.
It's Chancellor Sutler.
Damn it!
Why? Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power. Words offer the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth. And the truth is, there is something terribly wrong with this country, isn't there? Cruelty and injustice, intolerance and oppression. And where once you had the freedom to object, to think and speak as you saw fit, you now have censors and systems of surveillance coercing your conformity and
Cameras.
soliciting your submission.
We need cameras.
How did this happen? Who's to blame? Well, certainly there are those who are more responsible than others, and they will be held accountable. But again, truth be told, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into a mirror. I know why you did it. I know you were afraid. Who wouldn't be? War, terror, disease. There were a myriad of problems which conspired to corrupt your reason and rob you of your common sense. Fear got the best of you, and in your panic you turned to the now High Chancellor Adam Sutler. He promised you order, he promised you peace, and all he demanded in return was your silent, obedient consent. More than 400 years ago, a great citizen wished to embed the 5th of November forever in our memory. His hope was to remind the world that fairness, justice, and freedom are more than words. They are perspectives. So if you've seen nothing, if the crimes of this government remain unknown to you, then I would suggest that you allow the 5th of November to pass unmarked. But if you see what I see, if you feel as I feel, and if you would seek as I seek, then I ask you to stand beside me 1 year from tonight, outside the gates of Parliament. And together we shall give them a 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgotten.
How does it happen? How does a democracy turn into an autocracy? It doesn't happen immediately. Instability after the collapse of the Soviet Union leaves uncertain and dangerous times. A vicious terrorist attack, striking at the heart of the country, would motivate any citizen to want to take action and demand a leader that is willing to do so. When this happened to Russia, Putin responded by attacking Chechnya, resulting in 100,000 casualties. His popularity went through the roof. There have long been accusations that this was a false flag attack. The reality is it doesn't matter. No one has the evidence to support the debate. What does matter is this solidified Putin as the head of Russia. While the war rages on in Chechnya, with sentiments of revenge and territorial sovereignty, the previous president Boris Yeltsin steps down, Putin becomes the interim president, and when the election comes up, he easily wins. The course is very predictable from there. That outside threat is necessary for an autocrat to maintain control. In both the film and in Russia, the USA is usually the antagonist. In the case of Russia, preying on the sentiments of the older generation that remembers the Cold War well. The threat of detention and people being poisoned around the world is a strong deterrent for the populace to want to question their government.
When Sutler was appointed High Chancellor, they were at the riot in Leeds. I watched on the television, thinking I was going to see my parents killed. I remember them arguing at night. Mum wanted to leave the country. Dad refused. He said if we ran away, they would win. Win, like. It was a game.
For Putin, it very much is a game, or at least a calculation. If he allows people to protest freely, his popularity will crash, the war will end, and he will lose power. He must maintain an iron grip on the narrative, so any dissent must be squashed quickly.
You think people will buy this?
Why not? This is the BTN. Our job is to report the news, not fabricate it. That's the government's job.
The media effectively becomes another branch of the government, used as a tool to keep the population in line, and laying the groundwork and justification for upcoming war crimes. To anyone outside of Russia, these baseless accusations are laughable. We can look at it through the lens of the Syrian war and see how those strikes were carried out. But this lip service by the Russian Federation is not for the rest of the world. This pageantry is for its own people, so that clips of this man can be played back on their own news service, and as the only arbiter of truth in the country, be believed completely. But this web of fabrication cannot go on forever, as long as the Russian people can be reached. Some of them will question, some of them will think critically.
There is something wrong with this country.
In the film, we find a critical thinker in the inspector charged with finding the terrorist V. He pieces together that the 3 original terrorist attacks were not committed by terrorists, but in fact the party that is now in charge. Not dissimilar to the 3 apartment bombings in Russia that have links to KGB actions.
You're out early? Is something wrong? Don't look so good, sir.
I want to ask a question, Dominic. I don't care if you answer me or not. I just want to say this aloud. But I need to know that this question will not leave this office. The question I have to ask is, what if the worst, the most horrifying biological attack in this country's history was not the work of religious extremists?
Well, I don't understand. We know it was. They were caught. They confessed.
And they were executed, I know. And maybe that's really what happened. But I see this chain of events, these coincidences, and I have to ask, what if that isn't what happened? What if someone else unleashed that virus? What if someone else killed all those people? Would you really want to know who it was?
Sure.
Even if it was someone working for this government? That's my question. If our own government was responsible for what happened at St. Mary's and Three Waters, if our own government was responsible for the deaths of almost 100,000 people, would you really want to know?
This is the moment the war would change. When the heart of Russia, the people, are willing to face uncomfortable truths. That is the fact that Ukraine is its own country and does not want to be reunited under a new Soviet Union. And any action by Russia to change that is aggression. This is the hardest moment. Inaction is the most common for all of us. Humans generally want to live their lives peacefully without conflict. In this fictionalized England, the population has the benefit of a knife-toting protagonist that embodies everything real-world opposition forces do. He attacks government supply chains. He defends damsels from the government's fingermen. He hacks into the government's broadcast system and speaks truth to power. And most importantly, a heavy-duty layer of plot armor, which is justified by the notion that the idea is eternal.
Why won't you die?
Beneath this mask, there is more than flesh. Beneath this mask, there is an idea, Mr. Creedy. And ideas are bulletproof.
If only Ukraine had this nearly immortal protagonist. Instead, they have humans who make up this idea. And unfortunately, those humans are suffering. Russia doesn't have the type of military that can just target the enemy's military. The only tactic available to them is to try to smash as much of the infrastructure as possible so civilians can no longer live there. These actions would be intolerable even to Russians if they actually got a clear picture of what was going on. We hear a lot about the Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. To a world with free press, falsehoods surrounding the issue are easily debunked. But to Russians that are repeatedly spoon-fed this misinformation about the conflict, they believe wholeheartedly that Nazis in Ukraine are persecuting Russian speakers, and cannot understand the fact that while there were protests after the Revolution of Dignity in eastern Ukraine, after a few weeks they petered out into a peaceful ending. It wasn't until Russian armed separatists seized buildings that it escalated into the conflict that took more than 6,000 lives before the Russian invasion. Many of these separatists now desperate to distance themselves and separate from Russia. In the film, V represents the idea of justice and liberty for all. But outside of that story, there's another thread, a coming-of-age story. Evie represents the individual. In the beginning, she is part of the problem. She watches as her parents are deleted, and she grows up to do nothing about it. She is rehabilitated by the state and lives a normal life. When she's older, she watches these same events unfold again, in the exact same manner, where her good friend is hauled away, never seen again. Still, gripped by fear, she takes no action. Earlier in the film, she lamented that she was not bold like her parents. V sees an opportunity to break her of the fear and give her the freedom to be that bold, strong person she desires to be.
And it's over.
Almost.
Stop. Get your hand off that lever.
No longer governed by fear, she's able to courageously do what's right, even though she risks death. The film has a very happy ending. V is able to convince the head of the FSB/KGB equivalent to turn on the High Chancellor, the autocrat of that government. The head is cut from the top. Putin, anticipating a similar action, has already replaced those around him. Without an authoritarian giving the government enforcers orders, the enforcers stand down and allow the population to pass. Unfortunately, such happy endings rarely happen in real life. The people of Poland pushing for democracy in 1980 were met with a brutal show of force, as well as Ukraine's maiden revolution. Unfortunately, it's too dangerous for an autocrat to let democracies flourish on its borders. The key thing the film highlights is the numbers, the unity of the population. And while we have seen a few brave Russians stand up and protest the actions of their government, it has not been anywhere near the scale required to actually have an effect. The government has way too many enforcers that can rapidly beat down the protesters, take them off the streets, so no movement can get started. In the film, if V is the symbol for liberty and justice, the parliament that houses the corrupt fascist government is the symbol of evil. And as the film comes to a crescendo, we hear none other than Tchaikovsky's, a Russian composer, 1812 Overture, which he wrote to commemorate the Russians repelling Napoleon's invasion. The irony is just too much.
Who's Edmond Dantes? And he was my father. And my mother. My brother. My friend. He was you. And me. He was all of us.
In the end, we come to the realization that the hero wasn't the masked superhero of the film, but each individual person that got over their fear and showed up to speak truth to power. The lies will continue. The morale will not improve. The world is watching and waiting for the heroes of Russia to stand up.
We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Good luck and Godspeed to everyone affected. I have donated and will happily suffer energy price increases double or triple of where they are now. I hope everyone that's in a position of safety, like myself, can do the same. Glory to Ukraine and citizens of Russia. We believe in you. We're counting on you. That's all for now, soldiers. I'm Commander Sirius, and I'll see you in the next one.